this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Corsair iCue 5000T RGB. The T stands for tantalizing, and this is a features guide where I'm going to talk to you about the various features of this case and the highlights of building in it. And as you can see, it's a very nice looking case when it's fully built, and I'm going to do a separate build video where I talk to you about all the different aspects of it and show how to build in it if you're interested, where I'll go into a lot more depth. But in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about the various highlights of the case, the features, and the lowlights of it. I also set it up in two different formats so that I can show off the various interesting points of it. You'll see it here, for example, with a 360mm radiator top mounted, and then one side mounted on that rear panel with the Corsair H150 Elite Capellix LCD display and Corsair's ML120 RGB Elite fans as well, with 6 set to intake and 3 on exhausting through the radiator at the top and 1 at the rear. So 2 different fan layouts, and I'll go into a lot of depth and talk about the cooling capabilities of that later on. But the 5000T is remarkably comparable to the 5000D I did a video on previously, except this is a more premium version, because as you will have seen at the beginning of this video, it comes set up with multiple different RGB strips along the side, bottom and top, and comes pre-installed with Corsair's LL120 fans on the front as well. It also has Corsair's Commander Core XT fan control system, so you have the control for up to 6 fans in terms of power and RGB lighting, as well as some other things, and I'll show you a close-up look at that later on. And obviously you get a premium finish with a really nice setup. It's able to support up to an E-ATX motherboard and a multitude of SSDs and hard disk drives. I'll leave all the specs in the description, but I'm also going to show you the mounting points for various things and talk about the highlights and lowlights of those as well. You have radiator support for 360mm on the front, top and side, so there's potential around rotating them in different directions too. But there's a lot of little highlights to the case as well. For example, you notice this front panel, which is held in place with some small clips and magnets, has some very fine mesh on it, which is obviously dust proofing, and yet does a good job of letting the air through and the RGB shine through as well. So the air will get through that quite easily enough and still results in some excellent cooling, and that should over time ensure that the case remains clean and free of dust, and also easy to clean because you can obviously just pop that cover off and clean it up nicely and keep the airflow going as well. Now as standard, you get Corsair's LL120 RGB fans included. You get 3 of them, so you probably won't want to purchase extra unless you did the setup like I'm doing with a 360mm radiator mounted on the top, because I did find that the cooling was actually really decent with that setup with just 3 fans as intake and 3 as exhaust. But the LL120s obviously offer some fantastic RGB lighting with the ring around the outside and the fan blades lit up. I've done a separate video previously comparing them with the QL120s. If you're interested, I'll link to that video in the description so you can find out more. But as standard, this is a nice setup, and they're obviously all connected up to the Corsair Commander core as well, so it's easy to just get on with these fans being installed. But for this build process, I wanted to make sure all the fans matched, so I've taken these out using the fan tray, taking that out and obviously then removing them. But as standard, they obviously require 2 lots of cables, the RGB and power cables, and as I said, they are as default plugged into the Commander core, but you can take them out and replace them with other fans from Corsair quite easily, and then obviously use those in the Commander core. So in this case, I'm using the ML120 RGB Elites, you can see on the left hand side, which have slightly higher in specs in terms of the airflow capabilities, but aren't quite as nice looking in terms of the RGB. You can see it here, for example, with a side-by-side comparison. I'll do a video separately to compare these two and talk in a bit more depth about it. Other interesting things about the case include the removable top, which you can see here, which is a bit of a struggle to get off, but also a danger. Don't lift the case with that top because it will just come away in your hand with the full weight of your machine in there. So make a note if you do get this case, that's a danger. But what you'll notice is it has a removable dust cover, and the top of it is also dust proof for ingress. You'll also see that there are lighting strips across the top there that, as I said, are already pre-connected. Round the back is where a lot of the action happens. You can see all the different cables plugged in, and the Commander Core XT is pre-installed and set up with all the fans connected to it. Obviously you need to connect the cables from that into your motherboard and power supply and other things. There are small other conveniences. As you've seen there, for example, the back door can be removed, so that makes life easier when you're going through the build process. The Commander Core XT can be seen a bit closer here. Obviously you have the 3 fans that are already connected, plugged in, and the capabilities to plug in 3 more. Other things you'll notice, it also has temperature sensors plugged in, so you have 2 lots of temperature sensors. And next to that you have a small RGB node which controls the RGB lighting from the strips. That requires power from the PSU, and then it also connects up to the right hand side of the Commander Core XT and gives you the RGB connection there, so that everything's controllable within Corsair's iCue software, because you can go in there and you can control the RGB lighting of both the fans and the strips. And if you've got all Corsair stuff, you can sync everything up nicely, and it looks really good, as you'll have seen from the clips at the beginning of this video. And stick with me for more of that RGB lighting demonstration at the end, and obviously I'll go into a lot more depth on that in the full build guide, so check that out if you're curious. The Commander Core XT is very similar to the Commander Pro and the Commander Core that you will have seen if you've used or looked at the videos on the H150i Elite Capelix coolers. It has a USB connection that goes to the motherboard, but it also has an adapter so you can plug in extra USB things to it, SATA power connection, and then, as I said, you also have the temperature sensors that you can put around the case on importable peripherals, for example, your graphics card. Now, at the bottom of the case you have an accessories box, but there's also obviously mounting points for 2 hard drives, so you can put 3.5-inch platter drives in here, and that goes into this nice bay which is located down the bottom. If you don't want to use it, you can easily remove it. It's held in place with 2 thumb screws which are easily removable, and then you can just pull it out. It's also worth noting that there are hooks at the bottom here, so it is possible to actually adjust the position of this tray too. You can see you can move it further forward towards the front of the case, which is actually ideal because that gives you more room when you're installing a power supply unit. If you have a larger power supply unit, or if you just want more space for the cable management and the placement of PSU cables, that makes life a lot easier, moving that tray along and setting it up. The installation of the hard disk drives is dead simple because they basically just pop into these plastic caddies and then they just slide into that tray mounting system. So really straightforward to do that, and you can put 2 3.5-inch drives in there. The power supply unit that I was using, the RM850X, I found however that it won't fit with the hard disk drive tray in place, or if it would, it would be a very tight squeeze and you will have trouble with the cable moving around. So you do need to move it forward a bit, and then you have a lot more flexibility in terms of that movement there and fitting. Definitely get those cables installed before you try and install the PSU though. And you can see that you also have mounting points for SSDs. So there are 3 trays on the rear to install 2.5-inch SSDs, so you can easily set them up here and install those. You also have other options as well though, and that's one of the highlights of this case, is that you have a variety of places to mount different drives. For example, this removable tray where the Commander Core sits, you can take that out, and that obviously gives you the all-important access to the back of your motherboard if you need to install things like the back plate for an all-in-one cooler, for a CPU cooler. But it also has a number of points on it that I covered off in the 5000D airflow, where you can mount SSDs on there instead. So if you take the Commander Core off, you could put your SSDs on there. You also have 2 points on the front of the case where you can mount your SSDs if you prefer. If you want to make more space at the back for cables or for other fan control boxes or other things like that, you can do that easily. So you can put them at front and then run cables through to the back. You might prefer to see your SSDs for some reason. Another highlight here is that you can obviously just take that front panel off as well. So both the front and rear panels are removable, which gives you a lot easier access in terms of the build process. At the rear you have this fan tray which can hold 3 fans, or a 360mm rad as I said, and this is removable with a number of different screws that are hidden away, and then you can take that out. Now you don't need to use it obviously. Behind that you will find the cable guard. Now I found that this cable guard was actually problematic when I was going about my build process. I left it in place and then tried to put my cables in, and that became a bit of a pain. But you can see just all the things coming apart here and how you can access the various things. There's a bracket included at the bottom, and there's a different one as well, so you have the option of switching between these depending on what you're going to be doing. So you'll see a bit later on that where I put some fans and a radiator on the side, I decided to switch those trays around, and then that obviously changes the layout and adjusts the airflow and just the overall look and feel. One of the things that I found with the case is there's a nice number of points for tidying your cables. You can see there's a number of different hooks and loops. You also get a number of different Velcro ties, which is really welcome because it means you can tie things up neatly without putting them in place permanently in case you need to make any adjustments. With the 5000D airflow, I found that the cable management was fantastic and it was really easy to do, but with the T it's a little bit tighter, and I'll show you what I mean later on. Now you do have various different mounting options for radiators, so you can see me mounting the Kraken Z73 top mounted here, but you can mount a 360 rad on the front or the side or the top, and you can do combinations, but you can't put all three, so you can't have a 360mm rad on the front and the side at the same time because they'll interfere with one another, so it's not quite space to do that, but you do have a number of setup options. This will take up to an E-ATX motherboard, and you can see the markings for smaller ones for ITX, for example, or Micro-ATX, and you have included standoff screws to give you the option to install those. But here I have an ATX motherboard, not E-ATX, just standard ATX, and that will just fit in as standard with the standard standoffs. And what you'll notice here, one of the benefits of this case is the sheer amount of space you have in terms of the build. So I obviously have my top mounted radiator in place here, and yet I still have plenty of space for my main CPU power connectors for the top, for the 8-pin power connectors, and for other cables that I'm just running to the back. So obviously from the pump head I'm running cables into the back there, I'm running fan cables to the back and lots of other things, and it's all neatly hidden away. You also have this cable hiding tray on the side, which does a good job of blocking things away, but I found it problematic when I was going through the build process because simple things like that fat USB front panel connector is a bit fiddly to get behind that tray. So I'd recommend if you go about this build process, you probably need to remove that tray to make the most of it. Now here you can see some of the mess of my cable management, and I purposely leave it messy just to test what it's like, and also obviously because I'm switching between different builds. But what I found was that in this state it wasn't that easy to close the door. The bottom of the door was still pushing out a little bit, so I found that the cable management setup isn't quite as good as it was in the 5000D, which I commented on how wonderful it was to be able to shut the doors and hide away your cable shame, but in this one it's a little bit trickier to manage and not quite as easy. I am however happy to report that the 5000T RGB runs really quietly, both with both fan layouts that I had set up. I was expecting it to be noisy, but it isn't. Under some pressure it runs really quietly, and I'll go into more details on this on the build guide, so be sure to check out that video if you want to find out more. But I found remarkably quiet, and obviously it has a very nice aesthetic to it with those RGB lighting zones and the light strips all over the place. If you're using Corsair's fans, whether it's the LL120s or in this case the ML120 Elites, you get some very nice customizable lighting that's all linked together, so you can use Lighting Link and just create a really nice aesthetic. Overall a fantastic case with some really nice highlights. The biggest lowlight for me is probably the price. It's very expensive compared to other ones on the market, but it's still a fantastic offering from Corsair. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well, and have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel, and most importantly, have a great life.